Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on what is emotional intelligence and how do you develop it. My name's Jean Balfour, and I'm going to spend about the next 45 minutes taking you on a bit of a journey through understanding what emotional intelligence is, why it's important, and then really importantly answering this question: how do you develop it? I'd really like to welcome those of you who are joining us. We're very happy to say we've got people from all around the region. You can see here Singapore, Hong Kong, Kuala Lumpur, Melbourne, Phnom Penh, and I'm personally excited to see somebody dialing in from Christchurch or New Zealand, which is where I spent much of my childhood. This is one of our series of lunchtime webinars, and if you'd like to carry on attending these, please do ask to be added to our mailing list, and we will certainly be able to do that. Now, to work with the technology today, you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen that you've got a control panel, and you can open and close the control panel using the little orange arrow. If you would like to ask a question, the only way of doing this is actually via the questions tab. So please do ask as many questions as you can through this. It's always good for me to have an interaction with you. If you haven't got a question but you'd just like to make a statement or a reflection, please also do it via the question tab as well. The important thing is that when I read those out, I won't share the name of the person who's asking the question, so that you can ask that in an anonymous way. And we will share the recording with you after the workshop, so about an hour after the webinar today, you'll receive an email, and in the email will be a link to the YouTube recording. Please feel free to share this more widely, and also if you want to watch it. For those of you who are watching the recording, welcome. You may have not made the time of the webinar. So a little bit about us. We're a Singapore-based consultancy, and we provide leadership development, executive coaching, and diversity and inclusion. And a couple of kind of different things about us. One is that we're increasingly working in a virtual environment. So running this webinar for you today is something that I'm doing a lot of now, increasingly working using things like GoToWebinar, or we also use a video conferencing software, Zoom, where we're able for everybody in the classroom to be on camera. And we're really enjoying working in that different way to run these programs. The other thing that we're very excited about is that we're on a journey to become accredited with the International Coach Federation as a coach training provider. And we're in the middle of a pilot program to do that. So we're not only providing executive coaching, but we're also training people to be coaches themselves. Today's webinar is about emotional intelligence, and it's kind of hard to talk about emotional intelligence without referring to Daniel Goleman. And Daniel Goleman really sees emotional intelligence as a new way of thinking about the ingredients of life success. Well, in many ways, we're more than 20 years on from the development of the concept emotional intelligence, but it still does feel very fresh. It still feels something that's important for us to learn a lot about and to get to grips with, to understand why does it matter and what can we do about it in our day-to-day working lives. So let's start with a poll to see what you think is important. So which quality do you think is most important? To be self-aware or to be socially aware? Okay, so I'll close the poll now and share the results. Wow, so there's a kind of really strong sense that self-awareness is the most important quality for success at work. But also 26% of you saying social awareness is also very important. And actually, I think what you'll see today is that it's true. So I personally hold that social awareness is incredibly important. And what I've learned, I think, is that it's the ability to work with our self-awareness, with our level of self-awareness, and then mixing that with a high level of social awareness as well. And we'll look at definitions for all of those as we go through today. Great. Okay, so thanks for your participation in that. We'll do a couple more polls as we go through. So let's just look at what it is that we're meaning. So as I said, Daniel Goleman in many ways is the person who's brought emotional intelligence to us. He was the person who wrote the book Emotional Intelligence in 1995. But in fact, he wasn't the original researcher. He was building on research that was started by Peter Salevoy and John Mayer, and has gone on to be done by others like Richard Boyatzis, for example, who have continued to work in this field of what is emotional intelligence. And Daniel Goleman himself is still working in the field, and I'll share with you later links to some of the information that he provides and ongoingly provides. And we've also got a growing body of research that is helping us to understand it. And Daniel's definition of emotional intelligence is that it's our capacity to recognize our own feelings and those of others, and then our ability to manage those emotions both within ourselves and in the way we operate and work with others, so in the relationships that we have. So it is this twofold thing. It's me and my feelings and my managing of that, and it's me in relation to others. And how does that play out in the workplace, which is where we most commonly focus on the concept of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence has been defined as being different to a general intelligent quotient. So many of you will have done some sort of IQ test when you were at school, maybe, and it was measuring things like your verbal comprehension or working memory or your processing speed. Whereas as we've started to see, that emotional intelligence is really about our ability to recognize and understand our own emotions and the impact of those on others. And there's been a lot of studies that have looked at what is this, is it more important in the workplace? Is IQ enough, or do we need people to have EQ in order to be effective both in their work and in their leadership? Most commonly, EQ has been associated with leadership, but there's a growing number of studies saying it's beyond leadership. So why does it matter? So I'm going to share with you a few studies that demonstrate some of the link. So one study looked at the relationship between partners in a large multinational service delivery partnership, and what they saw was that those with high EQ had delivered more than 1.2 million profit more than those with a lower EQ. We see differences in job performance. At L'Oreal, they looked at the what impact did emotional intelligence have on their sales agents, and they found that those with higher emotional intelligence sold more and had less turnover of clients. We also see studies looking at this concept of career derailment and showing that those people with high emotional intelligence, actually their careers were more stable. For example, they were more able to handle change, more able to work as a part of a team, and they had better emotional interpersonal relationships. Another study looked at training supervisors in a manufacturing plant, and this is really critical. They saw that after they had trained people in EQ, there was a reduction of 50% in accidents. They saw a reduction in formal grievances, and their productivity increased significantly. And then finally, a number of studies have looked at the relationship between emotional intelligence and reduced stress and found a link. So you can see that the impact of learning to be emotional intelligent is wide. It's not just for those of us who are leaders, it's for all of us in our working days. How can we develop emotional intelligence to be more effective in our roles? Part of Daniel Goleman's ongoing work is that he's identified 3 levels of focus for leaders, and actually I would go beyond leaders, but this is his work. So he says we need to learn to focus on our inner. This is our self. How are we? What are we feeling? What are we noticing? And also how are we managing that? That we also need to be able to focus on other. That's the people around us, working relationships, our clients, all those people we interact with. And then finally, we have to focus beyond that. We have to be able to focus on the organisation, the climate the organisation's operating in, the context it's operating in, and that all 3 of these are important for us to be really effective in our roles. And it's this kind of triple focus that if we can do that effectively, then that will be helpful to us. So in all of this, most models, most EQ models, say that there are a number of factors, and these are the factors that we're going to talk about today. We've got self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. So we've got these 4 emotional intelligence indicators that are likely to be affecting us, to be a part of our emotional intelligence. Self-awareness, our ability to understand ourselves. Self-management, our ability to manage ourselves and our emotions. Social awareness, that's the awareness of the others around us. And relationship management, which is our ability to manage relationships within that space. And what I'm going to do with each of these is go through and share a little bit of information from them about what it looks like and how does it look. And then I'm also going to talk about what you can do about it. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So I think most of you are able to hear it. I think there's only one person who's struggling. So I think I'll just keep going in this space. Okay, so what do we mean by it? So social awareness is the ability to understand and recognize your moods, emotions, drives, and as well as the effect on others. So it's both how do I recognize that in myself and how do I notice that that's having an impact on others? What do I see of who I am and how that impacts others? And with all of the factors, we see some hallmarks of what we might see in people. So we see people as being self-confident, and that's really linked to a realistic self-assessment. People who have a high level of self-awareness usually know where their strengths and weaknesses are. And so they're able to say, look, I know I'm good at this. I feel confident about doing this. Or this is an area that I know I'm not so good at. So it doesn't affect my confidence. I know I'm not so good at it. I can learn it. I can develop it. And because of this kind of clarity, they're also able to really laugh at themselves. I have a good friend who's been a very senior leader in organizations, and he's often joking about his inability to be an effective listener. And because he jokes about it, it gives his team permission to say, you're not listening to me. And because it's not so serious, everybody knows about it. And so they can really kind of call it out and ask him to listen more effectively. So all of this is about our self-awareness and being aware of the impact on others. And self-awareness goes deeper than just one piece. It's really an awareness of what makes us up, what makes us. And so we've got a whole lot of things. We've got our values. What are the things that we hold to be true and good in society? What are the beliefs? What are the things that we believe in? What are our emotions? What am I feeling at any given point in time? What are my drivers? So what is it that drives or motivates me to work? What are my triggers? This is what is it that triggers me to react? So is there something that if somebody says it in a certain way or behaves in a certain way, it causes me to kind of react in a way that perhaps I'm not so proud of? What are the rules that we live by, and therefore how do they impact others? So awareness of that is very important because we often expect people to live by the rules that we like to live by ourselves. And finally, what's our self-talk? Because that's going to give us quite a bit of information about what we're thinking and feeling. So how do you develop this? Well, it really is a journey of noticing, learning to really notice yourself and think, what's going on here? So one way you could do this is the next time you go to a meeting, could even be this afternoon, just take a couple of minutes when it's okay for you to not be so present in the meeting and see what's happening. First of all, what are you thinking? What are the thoughts that are going on? What's happening in your body? Are you feeling tense? Are you sitting upright? Are you slouching? Are you feeling worried about things, excited? What's your breathing telling you? Is it quick? Are you kind of breathing in a way that might indicate you're anxious? Or is your breathing kind of slow and relaxed and calm? How are you reacting to others when they say things? And how are they reacting to you when you speak? What do you notice about that? What values are you hearing arise? So let me just give you an example of this. So if you have a value that it's very important for people to be on time, people arrive in the meeting a bit late, are you kind of tutting at them? Or are you seeing that that's your value and perhaps you have to question how important it is? And then finally, are there judgments going on? Are you making judgments about yourself and how you're being in the meeting, or are you noticing that you're judging others as well? So really just noticing can begin to develop our self-awareness. And my suggestion is that you just notice in the first place, practice noticing. Each meeting think, oh, where am I right now? What's going on? What am I aware of in this meeting? And all a part of that is also really important to get in touch with feelings. So some people are really, this comes really secondhand to them, second nature. They're just in touch with their feelings and it's very easy. But for some other people, this is much harder and they have to kind of go on a journey to do that. And ways that you can begin to do that is really a bit like I've already said, noticing your body. So being in your body, it will give you lots of clues about your feeling. For example, if you're feeling a bit sort of tense in your stomach, that might be suggesting you're anxious or worried about something. Our behaviour gives us clues. If I'm speaking very quickly, or if I'm being a bit snappy maybe with somebody, maybe I'm feeling something that I wasn't really aware of. And finally, our thoughts give us big clues to what we're feeling. They're so interrelated, our thoughts and our feelings, they're kind of crossing over all the time. So if I'm noticing that I'm maybe having some negative thinking or some positive thinking, then there's a chance that that will be impacting on our feelings. And it's really key in our workplace that we talk about feelings, we get to know our feelings, because whether we like it or not, they are impacting our actions. And so it's really important that we learn to do this well, and it's a key part of emotional intelligence. And then finally, here's a few other tips. There's some really good research that shows that journaling or writing things down, noticing what happened today, what went well, what was tricky, will actually help you to get in touch with what was going on. You can ask some trusted friends either to give you positive feedback or areas for development so that you can grow an awareness of that. You can seek feedback more generally. So you can, 360-degree feedback, of course, is one of the ways that really helps us to get an understanding of how are people seeing us and how are we managing that. And we can also look for patterns. So if I always have a reaction when I meet a particular person, what's that telling me about me? That's a pattern that I can learn to understand, and all of that can help me to be more self-aware. So those are a few little suggestions for increasing self-awareness. And before I go on, I'm just going to pause and see if anybody's got any questions related to self-awareness. And while I'm waiting for any questions to come in, I'd just like to say that Google have recently made a lot of their resources available to us on the web. And one of the things that they've made available is the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. And on this website, which is SIYLI, Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute.org, there are some wonderful resources for thinking about how you can do this. They've also have an open program that if you wanted to go on it, you can go on it. And there they teach about self-awareness and resilience in that environment. Okay, so we don't have any questions at this point, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. And this is where we're going to look at self-management. And the self-management is kind of the next step, if you like, from self-awareness. It's the ability to control our disruptive impulses and moods once we notice that they're happening, once we're aware that they're happening. And it's kind of about suspension. So it's basically, if I see myself reacting to something, I'm able to pause and respond. And people who are able to do this well come across as being more trustworthy and having high levels of integrity, because you can see that they're congruent between themselves and the way they're acting. They're comfortable with ambiguity, so they're comfortable to see things as not necessarily as stark, but they'll live with things that are slightly less clear, slightly more vague. They can be more adaptable. They often have a high achievement orientation, and they may show up as being more optimistic. And Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist and philosopher and also a Holocaust survivor, he describes this space. He says, between a stimulus and a response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So what he's saying is that I can learn to choose my reactions, my responses to things. I can learn to find a way to manage these so that I'm more effective in the way that I do that. And one of the things that we hear about leaders is that everything a leader does is observed. And it's right down to the tiniest things. Who leaders say hello to in the morning when they come into the office? What do they have for lunch even sometimes gets talked about. People notice their leaders. And the importance of self-management for those of you who are leaders is really critical, because your ability to respond in appropriate ways to people will be seen as being a core part of your emotional intelligence. And so it's really critical that you manage that. And of course, we've got a few global leaders at the moment, and one in particular who we're seeing him reacting to things. And of course, that's not helpful. We want to feel that our leaders are managing themselves and managing their responses to things. So how can you do it? And what's going on that stops us doing it? And I'm going to draw on a bit of the neuroscience here. So we have obviously lots of parts of our brain, but there are two parts of our brain that are in particular at tension with each other in this journey to be self-managing. So the first of these is the amygdala. The amygdala was an early development part of our brain. It's a very primitive part of our brain, and it's the part of our brain that's associated with the fight, flight, or freeze response. And of course, we know that that's very primitive. People will say, you know, suddenly I needed to run, or I kind of froze and I didn't know what to do. It's very primitive. And that part of our brain is the trigger for our what we call emotional hijacks. When something happens and I'm kind of hijacked by it and it starts to control me. And that part of the brain, the amygdala, is in tension with the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain which is up here. It was the last part of our brain to develop, and it's associated with what we call executive function, our ability to take conscious decisions, to manage our responses. It's the part that helps us to kind of think clearly, if you like. The problem is that when we're in danger, the amygdala kicks in. And the amygdala was taught to kick in life and death situations. But of course, most of our workplace situations are not life and death, but the amygdala doesn't distinguish between those. So if I'm not feeling respected or somebody's not treating me very well, I might get that emotional hijack because I'm kind of protecting myself from something. So even though the threat isn't that big, it still feels like a threat, and that then means it's hard for me to concentrate, or it's hard for me to stay calm sometimes. And particularly under stress, we end up more in the grip of our amygdala. We end up more caught in our emotional center and less able to respond in a kind of managed way. And then finally, once something happens, another example of this, if you like, is that when our amygdala starts to react, so when we start to feel emotional, it can kind of build up. And we have to learn to stop that build up so we can quickly come back to being calm and responding in an appropriate way. So our job really in self-management is to learn to work with our prefrontal cortex to help it manage the amygdala, the kind of emotional reactions to things. And this is what it looks like. So when the amygdala takes charge, we get a kind of emotional hold, and our reaction is often quite unconscious. We kind of react to things that are happening before we even notice, and so we just react. Whereas if we're able to kind of pull into our prefrontal cortex, into our executive function, then we're more able to choose a deliberate response. We're more able to respond rather than react. And so learning strategies that are going to help us to be able to do this is a key part of self-management. And one of the ways that we're seeing that helps us to do this is the concept or the study of mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness. And I'm guessing that some of you will have heard of mindfulness, and some of you, it will be new for you. So I'd like to share some definitions with you now, just so that you can see what it is. So first of all, when you're mindful, your attention stays in the present moment, right here, right now. So mindfulness is really our ability to notice what's happening in the moment. Professor Mark Williams, who's done a lot of study of this at Oxford University, says it's awareness. It's awareness of what's happening as it's happening, both in my inside world, inside me, and the outside world. So I'm aware that I can see it. And finally, Professor John Kabat-Zinn, who's also done a lot of research and teaches mindfulness a lot, says it's also the quality of awareness that comes from paying attention to yourself and others and the world around you in a certain way. And as many of you will have heard about mindfulness, it's become something that's moved into organisations increasingly. And in fact, Daniel Goleman himself has really brought mindfulness to the fore of his work and saying that he thinks it's a really key part in us becoming fully emotionally intelligent. So why does mindfulness matter? And one of the great things that's happened over the last few years is that people have become curious about whether practicing mindfulness is actually making any changes. So people could see that practicing mindfulness was making a change in their behaviour, but were there any changes in the brain? And this study looked at what happened to the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex after an 8-week course of mindfulness practice. And what they saw, as you can see here, is that the amygdala shrank. So this is an actual physiological outcome of people practicing mindfulness, and the prefrontal cortex, our ability to be aware and concentrate and making decisions, became thicker. So this is really powerful for two reasons. One is it gives us the ability, as we've seen, we know that the prefrontal cortex is a key tool for us in managing the amygdala, keeping the amygdala in the appropriate space. And the other is that if we're more able to concentrate and make more effective decisions, then that makes us more effective in the workplace. Another study, which is part of an ongoing body of research by Dr. Amishi Jha, showed that mindfulness led to an increase in executive function, the prefrontal cortex, but also our ability to focus. That's really important because our worlds are increasingly distracted, and also an increase in our mood. But perhaps most important overall was a significant reduction in stress and burnout, and all of the mindfulness research points to that. So how can we self-manage? Well, the first thing is we can just stop and notice that our amygdala has hijacked you. Some of you may have heard about the book called The Chimp Paradox, and in that Dr. Steve Peter calls the amygdala the chimp, the kind of naughty chimp that's there. And so we can learn to notice the chimp and see that it's taken a bit of control, it's hijacked. And then we can basically engage our prefrontal cortex. We can step back and look for the facts, look for what the evidence is of the situation, see what's real in that situation. And then we can find a way to calm and choose our response. And that might be mindfulness for you. It might be other things. Some people will go for a walk and they'll know that just the act of going for a walk will help them to think things through. Some people, again, journal, also a way of accessing your prefrontal cortex. So whatever you do, it's really finding that pause, as Viktor Frankl referred to it, and giving you that opportunity to choose your response, because that's the essential part of self-management, is the pause and choice. If you are interested in mindfulness, and you know, really not everybody is, but if you are interested in mindfulness, there's a lot of stuff on the web. This is a web page from mindful.org. We'll share some links for you at the end of the webinar so that you can see those. Great. So we've been focusing on the internal factors, self-awareness and self-management, and now we're working to the external factors. So this one is social awareness. This is our ability to understand the makeup of other people. It's our skill in helping respond appropriate to people based on their emotional reactions, based on where they are. And what we see from people who are strong in social awareness is that they have good empathy. They've learned empathy if it didn't come naturally to them, or it's something that they have naturally. They have good expertise in building and retaining talent. And they're cross-culturally sensitive. So this is the ability to work with people from different cultures with a level of ease. And finally, they're organisationally aware. So that's the ability to kind of read what's going on in the organisation, understand the mood of the organisation, understand what things are going well and not so well, because you're kind of noticing and aware of these. And for this purpose of this webinar, I just want to focus on one small piece of that today, and perhaps the most important, and that's our ability to empathise. And Teresa Weissman, who's an academic studying in the nursing field, thinks that there are 4 attributes of empathy. The first is my ability to take the perspective of the other, so to see how the other person sees the world. We often we all hold a worldview, and the ability to empathise is to see both my worldview and see that somebody else might have a different worldview, and see it, and see the world like they see it and not like we see it. The second factor that she talks about is our ability to suspend judgment. So not to say, oh, that's good or that's bad, but to stand in that person's shoes and see it for what it is without judgment. It's, of course, empathy, our ability to see people's emotions, but it's also about our ability to communicate that. So to be able to say to somebody, oh, I notice you're feeling a bit anxious about that. How can I help you? So it's our ability to notice that and to communicate it. And people will often talk to me and say, can we learn empathy? Can you really learn empathy? And I can tell you that absolutely you can learn empathy. So the first thing we know from neuroscience is that if you find a connection with somebody, it actually triggers your empathy center. Once you get to know somebody, you're much more likely to be empathic. So seek out ways to get to know people. If you're noticing that you're working with somebody and you're struggling to kind of work out where they're coming from, get to know them better, because we see from the research that actually increases your ability to be empathic with them. You can kind of practice noticing. So think about a couple of the people you work with and begin to be kind of curious about them. What might they be feeling? How would I know? What clues are they giving me? What might they need? Do they have some things that I could help with or that I could be more aware of? Are they concerned about things? Am I being judgmental about them? Am I thinking, oh, they're being like that? And could I let go of that? And then, as I've said, connection, and how do you improve it? One of the exercises that I've done with groups about developing empathy is invited people to go for a walk on their own, and while they're walking, to notice the people around them and to notice and just to think, I wonder what they're feeling. And people give away lots of clues. It might be about how they're talking to the people that they're with, or it might be that they are smiling or frowning, or lots of information. And learning to look for those clues is a part of learning to be empathic. So I'll give you an example of this. I ran a workshop for some academic doctors, and we were in Edinburgh, and we invited them to go on an empathy walk on their own in the streets of central Edinburgh. And when they came back, they said, Edinburgh is happy. They all talked about it separately. They had walked separately. It was during the Edinburgh Festival, which, as many of you know, is a time of the arts and culture and lots of comedy coming to Edinburgh. And they said that once they stopped to notice, they noticed a lot of kind of joy and people really smiling and being happy and kind of playful, and they could see that. And in fact, we'd all been in Edinburgh for 3 days, and none of us had noticed it because we hadn't stopped to notice. So this is something you can do. Go to a local mall or go for a walk in the park. Just observe people. See, how can I see what they're feeling? And you might find that it's more than you would think. And finally, if you don't know, ask somebody. If you're working with somebody and you really don't know what they think or feel about something, ask them. Say, what do you think about this? Or how do you feel about that? So that you can really do that in that way, so that you can create that connection. So we're on the final one now. We've looked at the 2 internal, self-awareness, self-management. We've looked at the third one, social awareness. And now we're going to go on and look at relationship management. So this is about our ability to manage relationships and build networks, to find common ground. And we see that people who are strong in this factor of emotional intelligence are good at leading change because they're good at building relationships and get people working with them. They're effective influencers. They work as a coach, so they're able to kind of coach their employees and get to know them. They are good at managing conflict, and they're effective team workers. So the ability to kind of build effective social relationships, again, is incredibly important for our brain. So Matthew Lieberman says that being socially connected is our brain's lifelong passion. It's baked into our operating systems for tens of millions of years. And those of you who know me well will know that I often talk about, we need relationships, that we strive for relationships. If you think about one of the worst punishments we can give anybody is solitary confinement. And so it's really important that we learn to build effective relationships and that we learn to nurture those, to grow those relationships in organizations. And we are only going to focus on one tiny part of this today, and even that, only a tiny part of it. But just to kind of raise awareness about influence and how important influence is. So influence is the ability to affect others' attitudes, beliefs, and behaviours without using force or formal authority. Many of you will be working in a matrix structure. You'll be working in organisations where you are working perhaps alongside in project teams, and you need to influence people perhaps to do things or to change things. And you can't just tell them, you have to influence them. And so we have to learn to do that in a way that's really effective and takes people with us so that they kind of want to do it in the end. We help them to do that. And one of the best ways of doing this is to start by standing in their shoes. When we influence people, we most commonly start influencing them by how we would like to be influenced or our worldview. But if we stand in their shoes, empathise, get to know them, get to understand them, then that will give us some clues about how we can influence them. So what are their priorities? What's going on? I mean, for example, if somebody's at the moment got several other competing priorities, it might be a good time not to influence them, to wait till their pressure's off. What motivates them? What makes them get out of bed in the morning? What's going on in their environment? What might their boss be saying? What might their organisational context be doing? What might they be worried about? And perhaps most importantly, what's going to be in it for them? If I want them to do something, what's their win from this? What do they get? It's not just my win, it's about their win as well. And can I offer them anything to help with that? And really, we're only just touching on this today. But if you just take one small influencing tip away, it's to do that, to think about somebody you're influencing and really get to know them, stand in their shoes, and then think about what that tells you. What do you learn from that? And what does that tell you about how you could influence them? And then you have to flex your style to match theirs. So you have to think about, how do I influence them in a way that's going to be most helpful for them? And finally, it's all about listening, because by listening and getting to know people, then I can really see what their world is, their worldview, and help them in that space. So what we've done is we've had a look at these 4 emotional intelligence factors, and we've now got an opportunity to answer any questions. And so I'm just going to open up the question box and see if anybody's got any questions that they would like to ask about emotional intelligence, or any of the things that you would see as being important, or whether you'd like to share any of your own tips about how to develop your emotional intelligence. We have a couple of minutes to do this, to answer any questions while you're here on the line. While we're just pausing here, I'll say that there's a couple of things that I would suggest is very good. So having a coach, I myself work as an executive coach, but I also have a coach. Having a coach really helps us because it gives us an opportunity to sit and reflect on ourselves as a leader and to think about, how can I develop, where are my strengths and my weaknesses? Where might my blind spots be? Where might I not be seeing that I'm self-aware, or I'm not seeing the way I'm interacting or relating to people? So certainly doing that. And if you want to develop the emotional intelligence, for those of you who are leaders of the people in your teams, you can also do that by engaging in coaching yourself. So working as a coaching leader and really helping them to think through that space and how that works. So at the moment, we don't have any questions, so I'll just come on to the last piece and we'll do that. We have got a question now. How do you be more human when exercising self and relationship management? Oh, that's a really great question. So I think your question is, will I still be authentic, or will I still be human in that space? Well, my experience is that this makes us more human. If I'm relating from a, let me give you an example. Perhaps somebody has made a mistake at work, and I notice that my reaction, my amygdala, just wants to kind of have a reaction and kind of be perhaps a little bit cross about it. But actually, if I manage myself well and I'm calm and I think about it, then my response can be something that's very human for them to be on the receiving end of, because my response can be about calmly talking through with them the mistake they made and helping them think about how they could do it differently next time. So for me, I think being more emotionally intelligent is actually also about being more human. That's one other thing about this. I think that when we are self-aware, aware of the impact on others, we're more kind of integrated. We're more genuine and authentic. And it's not that we're just coming from our rational core. It all comes together in this space. Thank you for the questions. Keep them coming. We've got a few more. What if you have a supervisor who has low EQ and you have no power to influence him to see your point of view? Wow, good question, and not the first time it would come up. So I hold that really, if you can't influence them, what you can do is be proud of how you are. You can work to be really emotionally intelligent in yourself and to stay strong in that. So it's this piece of if I'm say my manager is not, because of their low emotional intelligence, they're speaking to me in a way that I find a bit difficult, or they're asking me to do things and it's kind of annoying me. If I can respond in a way that is calm, that I go home at the end of the day seeing their behavior for what it is and knowing that I responded well, that I feel good about myself, then in a way that's good. But that also creates you as modeling a kind of, if you like, to the first question, a human space in that. Somebody's asked the question, is EQ expressed as a numeric number or value? So the answer is yes and no. Unlike emotional intelligence, we don't have a fixed number that's there, but you can take, there are a number of emotional intelligence psychometric tests that you can take that will measure various levels on the different factors depending on the model. Daniel Goleman has his own model. There's another model called the Baron E something, I can't remember. There are a few models. I know, in fact, for those of you who are based in Singapore, there's in fact an organisation who trains people in the use of that psychometric tool within Singapore. Somebody's asked, to what extent does emotional intelligence contribute to the engagement of employees for the workplace? How can we use to gauge the pulse of our employees? So I haven't seen any research on this, actually, the link between emotional intelligence and engagement, and actually it's triggered me to go away and look at it. My anecdotal understanding of this is that if I, as a leader, so I think that engagement is my ability to help people to feel part of the organisation, to help them feel like they know how they're contributing, they know that they feel valued for their contribution, they feel able to share ideas and suggestions. It's about being a full member of that organisation. And I think emotionally intelligent leaders are open to that. So they want people to be a part of that. They want people to challenge and question, and they want people to be engaged in meaningful work, and they work with them to do that. And the things that we know help engagement, such as leaders as coaches, so we know that leaders who coach lead to higher engagement. And if we can see that the research says that leaders who coach are more emotionally intelligent, then I think we can make that link to increased employee engagement. And of course, we can take the pulse of our employees by using employee engagement surveys, but some organisations have gone, they often only get taken every year. some organisations have gone to a space where they just, sometimes every day, or they just ask people to draw on a flip chart, how are you today, using an emoticon. Anything that just invites people to say how they are, to connect with you, to talk to you, is really good. There are recommended tools for testing EQ. Somebody's asked that question: is there a recommended tool for testing? There's certainly, if you go, you can see the websites here. If you go to morethansound.net, that's probably the most comprehensive website on emotional intelligence, and follow the links to Daniel Goleman, and he has a test that he uses. But the other test that's very well respected is the Baron, I think it's EQI. If you Google BAR-ON, Baron was one of the researchers, and the EQ tool that he uses is very well respected. The other thing that I would say is that any form of understanding and knowing ourselves is helpful. So I work with the Myers-Briggs type indicator a lot. Myers-Briggs also helps us to kind of get a high level of correlation between our understanding of self and how that might be playing out. So I'm going to pause there. I don't see any more questions coming, and say thank you for joining us. I've put some websites up here if you're interested. And please feel free to continue to stay connected with us. We have a breakfast in Singapore in fact, next week. If you're interested in coming to that, please email me and I'll connect you with the people who are organising that. We'll continue to run webinars, and I'm also happy to engage with anybody via email if you would like to. Thanks very much for joining. The program will be available on YouTube later today, and it's been really good working with you. Thank you.